Welcome everybody to Mariners Chapel on this special day, on Palm Sunday. Food bank as usual tomorrow, the well at St Lawrence on Thursday. But just to say that Thursday evening, so Maundy Thursday at 7:30, there's going to be a time of worship and contemplation here at Mariners. So Thursday 7:30. So please come along if you can and you'd like to. And then on Good Friday, a prayer walk. So meeting here at 11 a.m. And I think there's going to be coffee and whatnots, apparently, and a prayer walk to each corner of the village and praying over the village and some singing of the blessing, I believe, over the village, Friday morning. So, and then next Sunday, Easter Sunday, we are meeting on Lion Quay with St Lawrence Church for Easter Sunday praise and worship.
Going to be reading from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 21. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away." This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. "Say to daughter Zion, see your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." The disciples went and did as Jesus had instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest heaven!" When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred and asked, "Who is this?" The crowds answered, "This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee."
Looking at Palm Sunday today, the day that Jesus actually entered Jerusalem, I saw something in it that I hadn't really seen before, something that God revealed. And again, such a familiar story. All these accounts of what happened in the Gospels are so familiar. And yet we have to make sure that we don't ever let, what's the expression, familiarity becomes contempt, that we lose the immediacy and the power of it. It's really important that we don't do that. So this is why it's so good to revisit these things at certain times in the year. And this, as it were, was that day. Today is Palm Sunday for us. And we think about and celebrate when Jesus actually came into Jerusalem in that particular year, on that particular Passover celebration. And the thing that God said to me, which was different, was what Jesus did was a huge announcement. This was his big announcement. He had been teaching the disciples in particular, but the crowds as well, for some time, about who he was. Many times, of course, he wasn't very explicit about that, not with the crowds anyway, much more so with the disciples as he explained to them the meanings of parables and the things that he said. But this day, Jesus makes the big announcement. And this was the visual demonstration of who he was, the thing that he had not explicitly said to the crowds in words yet, but on this day, by a practical enacting of the truth of Old Testament prophecy that was made about him, we see Jesus come riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, and so many things coming together. One of the things that Jesus loved to do was to point people back to the Old Testament prophecies, because the prophecies were part of their Jewish scriptures, what we call the Old Testament, and they were familiar things. Many of these things were very familiar words to the Jews. And the passage from Zechariah 9, verse 9, that is quoted by Matthew in his Gospel, in the reading we've just heard, is about the king coming into Jerusalem. And the prophecy specifically says that he comes having salvation, gentle, and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. That prophecy from Zechariah was made in somewhere round about 500 BC. There was no way that it could be an accident that Jesus, on this particular Palm Sunday, was fulfilling that prophecy. And he did that so many times. He often referred people to the Old Testament prophecies that they already knew, they already had and had for all those years. He did it with John the Baptist, famously, when John sent some of his disciples to Jesus to say, "Are you the one that we're waiting for, or should we look for another?" And Jesus did not give a direct yes or no to that. The direct answer would have been yes. And John pretty well already knew it, but he was looking for confirmation. He couldn't go himself. He was in prison. So he sent some of his disciples to say, "Are you," he's saying effectively, "Are you the Messiah?" John knew, and the people knew, the prophecies about the Messiah. They knew them very well. They'd been waiting for the Messiah for so long. And what Jesus said to John's disciples and sent them back to him with this as an answer: "Tell John what you see. The deaf hear, the blind see, the lame walk, the dead are raised." Those are all indicators, testimonies to the Messiah. And those are the very things that John's disciples saw Jesus doing. So he sent them back with a message to John that goes straight to the heart of the Old Testament scriptures and said, "Look, this is how I'm fulfilling God's word." And the Zechariah prophecy, 500 BC, is another one of those. This was a huge announcement, and yet it was done completely without words. This was visual. This was a prophetic statement. And if they knew their scriptures, if they bothered to think about it at all, they couldn't miss this. This was a declaration. Yes, I am the Messiah. He hadn't spoken those words, but he spoke those words through this action on Palm Sunday when he fulfills the Zechariah prophecy. But the big announcement, of course, was made against the background of the big misunderstanding. And the big misunderstanding was around what kind of Messiah Jesus was going to be. They had great hopes of him, but they already had a fixed mindset about who the Messiah was, what he would do when he came, what kind of person he was, and particularly what he would do. They expected a Messiah who would deliver them from the oppression of their enemies. At the time of Jesus, of course, they were occupied by the Romans, and they weren't entirely a free country. But they had this fixed mindset about the Messiah. And Jesus is saying in what he does on Palm Sunday, I am gentle and humble. And the thing about riding in on a donkey, not on a war horse, that speaks volumes about the kind of person that he is. He is not the model of Messiah that's going to be political and kick out the Romans and do all those kinds of things. It was not an earthly kingdom. It was a spiritual and heavenly kingdom, not a physical and earthly kingdom. This was not the golden age of Israel being, if I can put it this way, top nation. But this was a different kind of deliverance. Jesus was the one who would come and deliver not just Israel, but the whole of mankind from a far worse oppression than political enemies. He was coming to deliver us from the power and the penalty of our own sin. No political leader could do that. Only the Messiah could do that. Only Jesus could do that. So the true Messiah was actually going way further than what they'd come to expect. They'd have been happy, I think, if he'd thrown the Romans out, got together an army who would defeat the Romans and clear them out of the country, and Israel would become a nation, an amazing nation which was strong and powerful and was looked up to by the rest of the world. That was what they imagined. But he wasn't doing that. And this brought him into terrible clashes, of course, with the religious authorities, who were tending to see Jesus as a troublemaker who would effectively cause such a reaction from the Roman authorities that the Romans might very well clamp down on the Jews' freedom, which was very precious to them, to practice their own Jewish faith. And this seemed to be one of the main things they were so afraid of, and why they thought that they needed to get rid of Jesus, why they needed to kill him, because they had this terrible fear of what he would do. They did not understand that this was not political. They were working in the political arena. He wasn't. He was doing something far, far greater than that. So there was this huge misunderstanding, even of what Jesus did on Palm Sunday. And there was all the fear about how the crowds were going after Jesus, how they were out there in the streets with branches, and they were waving the branches and laying the branches on the floor, laying their cloaks on the floor. So much of the symbolism of that was welcoming a conquering king. It's what would have happened back in the days of David. When David came back from winning battles, he would come back into the city, and the people would come out and they'd be cheering and shouting and rejoicing, and there would be the waving of branches, not necessarily palms, but any kind of branches they could get hold of. They would be there waving them, putting them on the ground for the mounts to walk on. And back in those days, war horses were not common. They actually rode on donkeys. So the donkey was a royal symbol. Jesus is saying, I am a king, but I am humble and gentle. And he was saying he was the Messiah that they were expecting. Not quite in the form they were expecting, but he was the true Messiah. And it culminates in the big invitation. The invitation was to those crowds, to those people of his own time, an invitation to come and follow him, as many of them were physically doing that day. They were following Jesus and the disciples and whoever else as they walked through the streets of Jerusalem. But of course, this king who will fulfill all the prophecies and will, as it were, sit on David's throne, that was very important to them. God had promised that there would always be a king on David's throne. All of that is part of the invitation. The crowds were following Jesus. The disciples were following Jesus. The invitation is, come, be part of my kingdom and follow me. And of course, the invitation still stands. We are now invited because of what Jesus did, that we've celebrated here this morning. The invitation still stands, but it's to us now. It's to every individual among us. Come, be part of my kingdom and follow me. We're invited to know Jesus personally, not in theory, not at a distance, but absolutely up close and personal. We are invited to know him. And amazingly, that is possible through the sacrifice, the once-for-all perfect sacrifice for our sin that he made. This was the part the Jews didn't understand, that he was to be the final sacrifice for mankind's sin. And this leaves no room for misunderstanding when we know Jesus ourselves personally. And the invitation is there to us today. Come and follow me and be part of my kingdom. We're all called to it. There is a kingdom to be built in our time, in our place, principally in our hearts and lives. But come and know Jesus personally and be part of building this kingdom for the true King.